Imagine walking in on your father and your wife being intimate. This is the story of how a respected sheriff's Christmas turned into a night of revelations, revenge, and ruin. A night when the shocking truth about his father and wife's secret, and the children they shared, was uncovered. This truth sent him spiraling into a fury of heartbreak. Before we unravel this harrowing tale of deceit and violence, like and subscribe to shocking real-life crime stories for more stories that reveal the darkest corners of human behavior. Sheriff Elijah West was the kind of man people in Birmingham, Alabama, respected without question. At 40 years old, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had dedicated his life to law enforcement. A person who had seen both the best and worst humanity had to offer. With a steady career, a loving wife of 10 years, and 4 beautiful children, Elijah's life seemed to be the embodiment of stability and success. His home, nestled in a peaceful suburb on the outskirts of Birmingham, was always warm with the laughter of his children, 9-year-old Ethan, his firstborn son, 7-year-old Lily, his spirited and curious daughter, and 5-year-old twins Ava and Emma, who were inseparable and brought boundless energy to the household. On the surface, Elijah's family life was picture perfect. He and his wife, Laura, appeared to share an unshakable bond. Laura, 32, was a graceful, intelligent woman beloved by everyone who knew her. Their partnership seemed like the kind of love story people admired, a marriage built on mutual respect, laughter, and shared dreams. But the foundations of Elijah's life had been laid long before he met Laura, and they were built under the shadow of one man, his father, Charles West. Charles was more than just a father to Elijah. He was a figure of admiration and awe. At 65, Charles was the CEO of a wildly successful tech startup based in Huntsville, Alabama. His charm and influence were matched only by his wealth. Charles had always loomed large in Elijah's life, his expectations shaping much of who Elijah became. To Elijah, Charles was a mentor, a protector, and the epitome of success, a man who could seemingly do no wrong. Laura's story, however, was vastly different. She had come into their lives when she was just a college student at the University of Alabama. A young woman from a modest background, struggling to find her place in the world. Charles first met her at a business seminar, where she stood out, not because of her wealth or connections, but because of her intelligence and drive. Laura was ambitious, hungry to carve out a better life for herself, and Charles noticed. At first, Charles became a mentor to Laura, offering her guidance and support as she navigated her studies and early career. He funded her education, helped her secure internships, and even offered her a job at his company. To everyone else, it seemed like a generous act, a wealthy man helping a promising young woman achieve her dreams. But behind closed doors, their relationship took on a different dimension. Charles was captivated by Laura, not just her beauty, but her ambition and resilience. What began as a platonic mentorship soon evolved into something far more intimate. Laura, though grateful for his support, found herself caught in a dynamic she couldn't fully control. Charles was powerful, persuasive, and unrelenting in his affections. Their affair was a carefully guarded secret, one that Charles intended to keep at all costs. When Laura met Elijah through Charles, she was initially taken by his kind, grounded nature. Elijah was everything Charles wasn't: steady, genuine, and full of quiet strength. For Charles, this was an opportunity to secure Laura's presence in his life without suspicion. He encouraged their relationship, subtly orchestrating moments that would draw them closer. Over time, Elijah fell in love with Laura, seeing her as the perfect partner to build a life with. For Laura, marrying Elijah offered an escape from the complicated entanglement with Charles, a chance to build something real and untainted. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a lavish Huntsville venue and paid for in full by Charles, who played the role of the proud father, beaming at his son's happiness. For the next decade, Elijah and Laura built a life together, raising their 4 children in what seemed to be a harmonious union. Yet, Charles was never far away. He was a constant presence in their lives, always visiting, always involved, his influence woven into the fabric of their family. To Elijah, it was comforting to have his father so close, a symbol of unwavering support. But for Laura, Charles's presence was a lingering reminder of a past she had tried to bury. As the years passed, The dynamics between the three grew increasingly complicated. Elijah remained oblivious, trusting in his father's wisdom and his wife's loyalty. Laura played her role well, balancing her responsibilities as a mother and wife while keeping her history with Charles hidden. Charles, ever the puppet master, reveled in the control he maintained over both their lives. He had orchestrated everything, ensuring Laura would remain in his orbit, even if it meant manipulating his own son into marrying her. From the outside, the West family appeared to be the epitome of success and happiness. But beneath the surface, secrets festered, threatening to unravel everything Elijah believed in. It was a delicate balance, one that could only hold for so long before the truth would come crashing down. Unbeknownst to Elijah, the perfect life he had built was a carefully constructed illusion, and the cracks in the foundation were about to show. As the years passed, Sheriff Elijah West began to notice things that didn't sit quite right. They were small, almost imperceptible at first, gestures and moments between his father, Charles, and his wife, Laura, that he couldn't quite place. At family gatherings, Charles's hand would linger on Laura's shoulder just a moment too long. Or his eyes would follow her across the room in a way that didn't feel entirely paternal. Laura would laugh at his jokes, sometimes with a familiarity that seemed deeper than mere respect for her father-in-law. Elijah told himself he was imagining things. After all, this was his father, a man who had shaped him, supported him, and been his rock through life, and Laura was his wife, the mother of his children. They were both important people in his life, and their closeness was only natural. Or so he convinced himself. But over time, the unease became harder to ignore. There were quiet moments when Elijah would enter a room, and Charles and Laura would stop talking abruptly. Their smiles would disappear, as if caught mid-sentence. There were private conversations they'd dismiss as nothing important. When Elijah asked, at first he wrote it off as their shared bond forged from years of knowing each other. But there was something about their silences that felt heavier than they should have. One evening, Elijah's unease took a sharp turn. It was a normal night at home. Laura was preparing dinner while Elijah was in the living room, reviewing work for the next day. He noticed the odd silence hanging in the air. It was as though something was wrong, but he couldn't quite place it. He had long been aware of the tension between his wife and father. But this felt different, more charged. He brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the stress of the holidays and the weight of family responsibilities. However, the feeling continued to grow. The smile Laura gave him as she brought him a cup of coffee seemed forced, as if she were trying to hide something. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Elijah sat in the living room, waiting for the truth to reveal itself. The quiet was deafening. His thoughts swirled with questions he didn't want to ask. Had he been blind to the truth all these years? Had his father and wife betrayed him in a way he could never have imagined? The unsettling silence continued, like an unwelcome guest in their home, waiting for the right moment to expose the devastating reality that lay just beneath the surface. Laura was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while the kids played in the living room. Elijah, walking by with a stack of files from work, noticed Laura's phone light up with a message. His eyes caught the sender's name, Dad. That wasn't unusual. Charles often messaged both of them. But what stopped Elijah in his tracks was the message itself. Can't stop thinking about last time. Let's talk soon. Elijah froze. The words were vague, but they felt wrong, too intimate, too personal. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. Last time? What last time? Who was that? Elijah asked, his voice calm but probing. Laura looked up, startled. Oh, just your dad, she said quickly, swiping the notification away. He's probably talking about the last family dinner. You know how he likes to reminisce. She offered a small laugh. But Elijah didn't buy it. Her tone felt off, too quick, too dismissive. He felt a wave of nausea rise in his stomach as he stared at her. Later that night, while Laura was putting the twins to bed, Elijah couldn't resist the urge to check her phone. It wasn't something he'd ever done before, and the thought of invading her privacy made him feel sick. But something about that message gnawed at him, refusing to let go, unlocking her phone with the passcode he'd seen her use countless times. He scrolled through her texts with his father. To his frustration, the earlier message was gone, deleted. But there were other messages. Ones that didn't make sense in the context of a father-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. You looked amazing today. Can't wait to see you again. It's hard keeping this quiet. But it's for the best. Each message hit Elijah like a blow. They weren't overtly damning, but they were deeply unsettling. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? Could there be an innocent explanation for these words? He wanted to confront Laura right then and there. But the thought of accusing her, or even voicing his suspicions, terrified him. What if he was wrong? What if he was right? In the days that followed, Elijah tried to shake the feeling. But the tension in his chest wouldn't subside. Every interaction between Laura and Charles now felt loaded with hidden meaning. A glance across the room. A shared laugh. A touch on the arm. They all seemed magnified, more intimate than they should have been. But each time Elijah considered confronting them, doubt crept in. Could his father, the man who had shaped his life, really betray him like this? Could Laura, the woman he loved and trusted, be hiding such a devastating secret? Unanswered questions piled up in his mind, each one heavier than the last. And yet, Elijah hesitated, clinging to the hope that he was wrong, that his family was still whole and that the growing cracks were just in his imagination. Little did he know, the truth was far darker than anything he could have anticipated. Christmas night was supposed to be a time of joy and togetherness for the West family. The tree sparkled with ornaments. The smell of cinnamon and roasted ham filled the air. And the children, filled with excitement, had rushed to bed after eagerly opening their gifts. Sheriff Elijah West sat in the living room, nursing a glass of bourbon and soaking in the quiet after a long day. Laura had excused herself to check on the twins while Charles had stepped outside for a moment. Elijah assumed everything was as normal as any other Christmas. But something gnawed at him, a lingering unease that had been building for months. The earlier exchanges between his father and wife during dinner had felt too warm. Too familiar. Charles's hand brushing Laura's as he passed the gravy. Laura laughing a little too brightly at his jokes. Small moments that now felt unbearably heavy. The sense that something was wrong, a sense that had been creeping up on Elijah for weeks, grew stronger by the minute. He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight, of all nights, the truth was about to be exposed in a way he could never have imagined. Elijah decided to shake off his suspicions and head to bed. As he climbed the stairs, he noticed a faint glow emanating from the den. Curious, he made his way toward the partially open door. What he saw when he looked inside stopped him in his tracks. Charles and Laura were seated on the couch, far too close for comfort. Charles's hand was on Laura's thigh, high up, his face inches from hers. Their conversation was hushed, but the tone was unmistakable. Laura, her face flushed, leaned into him, whispering something Elijah couldn't hear. Then Charles pulled her into a kiss that was far from familial. The glass Elijah had been holding slipped from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Both Charles and Laura jolted upright, their faces a mirror of shock and guilt. What the hell is this? Elijah's voice was low, shaking with a fury that threatened to boil over. Elijah, it's not, Laura began, her voice trembling, but she couldn't finish the sentence. It's not what it looks like. Charles interrupted, his tone calm, almost dismissive, as if trying to regain control of the situation. Elijah's vision blurred with rage. Don't you dare insult my intelligence. I've been ignoring this for too long. You think I haven't noticed the way you look at her? The way she looks at you? Laura burst into tears, falling to her knees. I'm sorry, Elijah. I'm so sorry. Please let me explain. It was a mistake. A mistake? Elijah's voice cracked as he stepped closer. His fists clenched. You've been lying to me for years. Both of you. Charles stood, his face hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. Enough of this, he said, his tone dismissive. We're all adults here. Let's talk about this rationally. Rational? Elijah thought. How could anything about this nightmare be rational? Consumed by a need to know the full extent of their betrayal. Elijah stormed out of the room. He couldn't think clearly, his mind racing with possibilities. Every moment, every interaction between his father and Laura now replayed in his head, taking on sinister new meanings. Later that night, after calming himself enough to form a plan, Elijah made a decision. He would order a DNA test for all 4 of his children. It was a thought he never imagined he'd have, but now it felt like the only way to uncover the truth. The following week, Elijah received the results. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. He had prepared himself for bad news, but the reality was worse than anything he had imagined. All 4 children, Ethan, Lily, Ava, and Emma, were biologically his father's. The words on the page blurred as Elijah's chest tightened. The air around him grew suffocating. He sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the evidence of his father's ultimate betrayal. The children he had raised, the family he had built, were all part of a cruel, twisted deception. Elijah's world shattered. Everything he had loved and trusted had been a lie, manipulated by the 2 people he had held closest. The betrayal was a knife twisting in his gut, destroying his sense of reality and trust. He didn't just lose his wife and his father that day, he lost his family, his identity, and his very foundation. As he sat in silence, the weight of despair pressing down on him, something dark began to take hold. Elijah had always been a man of reason, of justice. But this was beyond justice. This was personal, and he didn't know how much longer he could hold himself together. The days following the DNA results were a blur for Elijah West. Each moment felt like a waking nightmare, the revelation gnawing at him from the inside out. He avoided his wife, Laura, and refused to answer his father's attempts to reach him. His mind raced endlessly, replaying the betrayal over and over. The pain was unbearable, but worse than the feeling of betrayal was the overwhelming sense of loss. Elijah had trusted the 2 people closest to him, and now, the family he thought he knew, the family he had built, was nothing but a shattered illusion. The foundation he had once believed was unshakable was now nothing but dust. The pain was overwhelming, a seething fury that consumed Elijah, leaving no room for rational thought. The people he had loved the most had conspired to destroy him, to deceive him in the cruelest way. The children he adored, the innocent souls he had devoted his life to raising, were painful reminders of the truth he could no longer escape. Elijah couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, all he could do was think. As the hours turned into days, the anger within him began to fester, darkening into something far more dangerous. One night, as he sat alone in the dim light of his study, a chilling thought entered his mind. What if he made them pay? What if he ended their charade for good? The idea was so startling that it jolted him upright in his chair. He paced the room, shaking his head, trying to push the thought away. But it came back stronger this time, more insistent. They had stolen his life, his identity, his family. They deserved to suffer for what they had done. Elijah's decision wasn't made in a single moment but rather over the course of sleepless nights and endless torment. By the time he accepted it, it felt like the only logical conclusion to his pain. He would take back control, end the lies, and ensure that the betrayal ended with him. The plan began to take shape. Christmas dinner had always been a tradition in the West household, a time for family to gather, share stories, and celebrate the season. Elijah decided this year would be no different. At least on the surface, he would use the occasion to bring everyone together. But this dinner would not end in celebration. He began preparing meticulously. He researched poisons that would act quickly and discreetly, leaving no chance for survival. After careful consideration, he settled on a lethal concoction, one he could mix into the food without arousing suspicion. Elijah was methodical, ensuring every step of his plan was foolproof. In the days leading up to Christmas, Elijah threw himself into the preparations with grim determination. He shopped for ingredients, decorated the house, and even played the part of the doting husband and father, smiling and laughing as though nothing was wrong. On Christmas Day, Elijah's home was filled with the warmth and cheer expected of the season. The tree sparkled with ornaments. The children were excited about their presents, and the dining table was set with care. Laura praised Elijah for his efforts, calling the decorations perfect. Her voice was laced with an uneasy sense of normalcy that made Elijah's blood boil. Charles arrived that evening, bearing gifts and his usual charm. He greeted Laura with a hug, and Elijah had to turn away to keep from letting his fury show. He busied himself in the kitchen, finalizing the dishes for the meal. The poison was carefully mixed into the food, undetectable and ready to do its job. When everything was ready, Elijah called everyone to the table. The children, unaware of the storm brewing beneath their father's calm exterior, laughed and chatted as they took their seats. Laura smiled at Elijah, oblivious to the darkness in his eyes. Charles sat at the head of the table, none the wiser to the danger that loomed. As the meal began, Elijah felt a strange calm wash over him. This was the moment, Everything he had planned was about to come to fruition. The smiles, the laughter, and the false sense of joy surrounding him were all part of the charade. He could feel the weight of the betrayal lifting with every passing minute. His family unknowingly sitting at the table, unaware of the price they were about to pay for their deceit. Charles raised a glass to toast the family. As he always did. To family, he said, his voice ringing with confidence. To family, Elijah echoed, his voice steady but cold. The meal began, and Elijah watched silently, each bite bringing him closer to his goal. He studied their faces, their movements, committing every detail to memory. Laura complimented the food, saying it was some of the best Elijah had ever made. Charles agreed, his usual arrogance shining through as though he were the center of the universe. But Elijah barely heard them. All he could focus on was the inevitability of what was about to happen. As the meal continued, the first signs began to appear. Charles paused mid-sentence, a hand clutching his chest. Laura followed shortly after, her face contorting in confusion and pain. The children, one by one, began to show the same symptoms. The laughter and cheer were replaced by gasps, cries, and panic. Elijah sat motionless, watching as the people who had destroyed his life succumbed to the poison. His heart was a storm of emotions, rage, grief, and a hollow emptiness that consumed him. He didn't move, didn't speak as the chaos unfolded around him. When it was over, the house fell silent. Elijah stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the head of the table, standing over his father's lifeless body. "You wanted control over everything," he said quietly. "Now you have none." He turned to Laura, her face frozen in shock, and whispered, "You were supposed to be my partner, my love, but you chose him." Elijah left the room and made a single call to the police. As he waited for them to arrive, he sat in the now empty living room, the Christmas lights twinkling around him, their cheer a stark contrast to the devastation he had wrought. Elijah knew his actions could never be undone. The lies had ended, and as the sirens approached in the distance, he felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just the cold, unyielding weight of everything that had led him to this moment. The once joyous home, filled with laughter and warmth just hours before, was now a chilling tableau of devastation. The lifeless bodies of his father, his wife, and his children remained at the dining table, the remnants of their final meal surrounding them. Elijah stared at his hands, trembling, as the weight of his actions bore down on him. The rage that had fueled him had long since faded, replaced by an unbearable hollowness. The phone he had used to call the police lay discarded beside him. In a steady voice, he had told the dispatcher everything. There was no need for an investigation, no need for questions. He had done it, and he was ready to face the consequences. When the officers arrived, the scene that greeted them was unlike anything they had encountered before. The holiday decorations, the untouched presents beneath the tree, the festive table setting, it all stood in horrifying contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded. Elijah made no attempt to resist as he was handcuffed and escorted out of the house. His face was blank, his eyes devoid of the fire and authority his colleagues had known for years. As the news of the crime spread, the town was thrown into a state of shock. Elijah West, their respected sheriff, a man they had trusted and admired, had committed an act of unfathomable violence. The details of the betrayal that led to the murders only deepened the community's disbelief. Many struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the horrific reality of what had just occurred. The image of the dutiful lawman was shattered by the man who had carried out such a horrific act. At the precinct, Elijah gave a full statement recounting every detail of the events that led to that fateful night. His voice was calm, his demeanor almost detached, as though he were recounting someone else's story. When asked why he had done it, his response was simple: "They destroyed everything I had. I couldn't live with it anymore." His colleagues, many of whom had worked alongside him for years, were left grappling with their own sense of betrayal. This was a man they had trusted with their lives. A man they had shared beers with after long shifts. A man who had once been the epitome of integrity. Now, he was a murderer, his actions leaving a stain on the department and the community as a whole. The town became a hub of media attention, with reporters flocking to cover the chilling story of betrayal, revenge, and tragedy. Neighbors who had once admired the West family spoke of their disbelief. describing Elijah as a loving father and husband. Few could comprehend how such a seemingly perfect life could unravel so completely. In the days that followed, the house where the tragedy occurred became a grim reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Flowers and candles were left on the front steps by those mourning the loss of the children, innocent lives caught in the crossfire of a dark, twisted family secret. For Elijah, there was no solace to be found. As he sat in his cell awaiting trial, he replayed the events of that night over and over in his mind. The faces of his children haunted him, their laughter a distant memory now replaced by the unbearable silence of their absence. His rage at Laura and Charles had given him the strength to act. But now all that remained was the crushing weight of guilt and the knowledge that he had destroyed what little was left of his world. The community, still reeling from the tragedy, was left with questions that might never be answered. How could a man so dedicated to justice commit such an act? How could the people closest to him deceive him so completely? And how does a town move forward after such a profound and shattering betrayal? The name Elijah West would forever be etched in the town's history. Not as the sheriff who had once protected them, but as the man whose world collapsed under the weight of secrets, taking everyone he loved down with him. The trial of Sheriff Elijah West became a national spectacle, drawing widespread attention for its shocking details and tragic complexity. The courtroom was packed with reporters, townsfolk, and those who had once admired Elijah, now eager to hear the grim story laid bare. The air was thick with tension as the case unfolded, a battle between two narratives, one of calculated murder, and the other of a man pushed beyond the brink by unimaginable betrayal. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the grim facts. They painted Elijah as a methodical killer who had violated not only the law but also the sacred trust placed in him as a sheriff. They described, in painstaking detail, how he had planned the murders, from the poison he had researched to the execution of his plan on Christmas night. The prosecutors highlighted his role as a protector of justice, arguing that his actions represented the ultimate betrayal of that oath. Sheriff West didn't just fail his family, the lead prosecutor declared, her voice ringing through the courtroom. He failed his community, he failed the law, and he failed every principle he once swore to uphold. The defense, however, offered a vastly different perspective. A different picture was painted of Elijah West during the trial. His defense argued that he was not a cold-blooded killer but a broken man, a victim of profound betrayal that had driven him to the edge. They described the years of manipulation and deceit by his father and wife, the devastating discovery of his children's true parentage, and the emotional torment that had unraveled his sense of self. Elijah West was a man destroyed by those he trusted most. His defense attorney stated, "What he did was wrong. Yes, but it was the desperate act of a man whose world had been ripped apart by unimaginable betrayal." They presented evidence of Elijah's mental state leading up to the murders, including testimonies from friends and colleagues who described him as increasingly withdrawn and erratic in the weeks before Christmas. Psychologists testified about the psychological toll of such betrayal, arguing that Elijah's actions, while heinous, were the result of emotional collapse rather than premeditated malice. The trial's most harrowing moments came when evidence from the crime scene was presented. Photos of the West family home, still decorated for Christmas, now a grim tableau of death and shattered trust, were shown to the court. The prosecution played the recording of Elijah's 911 call, his voice calm and resigned as he confessed to the murders. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the full weight of his actions became clear. As the trial progressed, the jury was visibly torn. On one hand, the calculated nature of the crime could not be ignored. Elijah had planned every detail, ensuring that none of his victims would survive. On the other hand, his defense had succeeded in humanizing him, painting a picture of a man consumed by grief and betrayal, pushed beyond the limits of reason. After days of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Elijah West was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Elijah stood stoically as the sentence was read, showing no visible reaction. It was as if he had already resigned himself to his fate, accepting it as the only conclusion to the nightmare he had lived through. The community, still grappling with the magnitude of the tragedy, was left divided. Some saw Elijah's actions as unforgivable, a calculated act of violence that robbed 5 lives and shattered the town's trust. Others, however, viewed him with a degree of sympathy, seeing his crimes as the tragic result of a man broken by betrayal and pain. As Elijah was escorted from the courtroom, his once commanding presence was now replaced by a quiet, defeated air. The town was left to pick up the pieces of a story that would haunt them for years to come. The name Elijah West would forever be remembered not as the sheriff who once protected them, but as the man whose life unraveled in the most devastating way, leaving a legacy of betrayal, vengeance, and unthinkable loss. The sheriff's story became a cautionary tale of how betrayal, unchecked power, and manipulation can destroy lives. The tragedy left a permanent scar on the community, forcing everyone to confront the devastating consequences of secrets kept for too long. Like and subscribe to Shocking Real Life Crime Stories for more stories that reveal the darkest corners of human behavior.